Nate, we're back again looking at these landing spots from our buddy Ian Cummings' recent 7-round NFL mock draft. So he has all the players covered. Love it. The link for that will be in the description if you want to check out 7 rounds of NFL mock draft action. So we got some different landing spots this week. We're also doing this a little differently. We're going to be taking the current DLF Superflex ADP and going pick by pick and labeling basically where these players landed, the draft capital they were selected with, and basically providing our thoughts on the landing spot, how it impacts them as a player. And then does that ADP that they have currently hold up? Is that going to stick with them after the draft, given this new draft capital? And then at the end, we're going to talk notable day 2 and day 3 picks, players that we think can kind of break the mold and break into these first 2 rounds of Superflex ADP at the end of the day. But first things first, let's talk about the 101, BIJAN Robinson going to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at pick 19 in this draft. Rachaad White truthers be damned. I would be sad for the few Rachaad White shares I have because I really like Rachaad White, and I think he has potential to be a solid running back this year, even though I don't necessarily believe in that offense. But Nate, love to hear your quick thoughts. Does the ADP hold up afterwards? Is this landing spot still sneaky good for at least Bijan? What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I do think it is sneaky good. And of course, the ADP holds up. Bijan to the Buccaneers. I think you're not worried about Rachaad White. I mean, I would be sad for Rachaad White, but once Bijan's there, you're not worried about Rachaad White taking any carries away. He would just be a true backup to Bijan. And actually, I think this landing spot would be good because their quarterback situation is a question mark. But if they get Bijan in there, they're probably going to have a commitment to the run game. Bijan's going to get plenty of opportunity here. This would actually be probably one of the best landing spots, I think, for Bijan fantasy-wise, because he's going to be a lot of the offense in this situation.
I don't think there's a landing spot for Bijan where I'd be like, nope, not 101 anymore. He's just that kind of talent and all the things. I think it's just a matter of, how much does that amplify his – when he gets into the player pool of veterans beyond the rookies, can he still be RB1 like he's being heralded as so far, the Dynasty RB1 coming off boards and startups and things like that? That's to be determined. I think the Bucs landing spot, like you said, is kind of sneaky good, but more than anything, I hate it for my boy Rachaad White. It is what it is. We have to move on. Speaking of moving on, our next pick coming off the board at the 102 in Superflex rookie drafts, we got CJ Stroud going to the Houston Texans. Nate,
Texans, Bob.
One half of the prophecy has been foretold. Going off the board in the first round with the second pick to the Texans. I love it. I want to hear your thoughts on this pick, though.
Yeah, CJ Stroud to the Texans. I like it too. I think it's a good spot for him. He can fit in that offense. Rumor is they're going to have, that kind of Shanahan-style offense because it's a guy that came from San Francisco. Anything resembling that kind of offense, I think CJ Stroud's going to do very well in. He is a guy that is going to disperse the ball extremely well to multiple different weapons in that offense. And while they might not have any top-tier weapons in that offense, they do have a good mix of players in both the running back room and the wide receiver room. So I like this for CJ Stroud.
I like the fit. I think, the nice thing about the Texans landing spot is they do have a lot of draft capital to build around their quarterback with, something that is less exciting about the Carolina Panthers landing spot. When we talk about the 101 or who's going the first pick in the NFL draft, one of the big drawbacks is, your pieces are a lot less exciting. Houston doesn't have those exciting pieces yet.
What?
But
Bob, LaVisca Chenault and Terrace Marshall don't get you excited?
Okay. All right. Fair enough. How dare I? I'm sorry. But at the end of the day, they don't have the pieces yet, but they have some pieces to make that happen to draft them with as they do in this draft. But moving along, we have Bryce Young at the 103 in Superflex drafts coming off the board. In a crazy trade up, the Las Vegas Raiders come up to pick 3 after talking with Arizona and getting a deal done. Come up to pick 3. They grab Bryce Young.
Chaos.
This is... You're right. This is absolutely chaos. This is one landing spot that we just haven't seen yet. What are your thoughts on this pick?
Before, so
they haven't had to, yeah.
I mean, gosh, could you think of too much of a better landing spot for Bryce Young? I mean, probably not. I mean, you got Josh Jacobs in the backfield. You're throwing out to Devontae Adams. You still have Hunter Renfrow there, right? And then, of course, you got Jacoby Myers. I'm not the biggest fan of Josh McDaniels, to be quite honest, but I don't think Bryce Young would have any problem in a Josh McDaniel offense.
Yeah, I think this is one where we can maybe expect the quarterback to have decent success early,
Yeah.
But my concerns would be, Devontae Adams not going to play forever. The tight end position right now is a wash.
Yep.
Then they have Josh Jacobs on the franchise tag currently. And then they have Jacoby Myers, who just signed a 3-year deal. Hunter Renfrow, who knows what's going to happen with him. So long term, I'd be a little more concerned. But I think in the short term, you maybe have a pretty solid quarterback here, which would be nice for his development too, because then you'd like to think that, he can get up to speed with an NFL quarterback while he has these pieces to support him. And then down the line, when his pieces are a little less exciting, like they kind of were at Alabama this past year, then he can kind of take over the reins for you and, officially lead that team like he was drafted to. Speaking of leading teams like they were drafted to, the Carolina Panthers draft our 4th pick off the board at the 101, the first pick in the draft. They just shock the world and they go all in on Anthony Richardson.
Cam Newton comparisons galore.
I mean, it was already low-hanging fruit, and now it's just right there in front of you. I mean, this pick would be off-the-wall bonkers, especially when you got C.J. Stroud, Bryce Young there. Bryce Young, the clear favorite to go 101 right now. What are your thoughts on this pick and the early production of Anthony Richardson getting, a starting job pretty much day one at this point?
A starting job, but like you said, and what kind of offense? This is not good for his development. They have to have a bridge starter. I don't know what that would look like for them. Who do they have over there right now?
Andy Dalton.
I guess he's a bridge quarterback still. You probably can get you a year, but Anthony Richardson, the fans would be knocking on the door, I would think, by midseason. And I don't think Anthony Richardson is ready to start by midseason, especially not with this lackluster offense. This just takes Anthony Richardson from, okay, I'm a little wary about him, to now, okay, I'm a little scared about his development. I understand it's the 101, but yeah, let's look at the situation.
Yeah, I don't necessarily disagree. I think the one thing looking at the Carolina's coaching staff, all of the, experience and developmental heads they have in that room, I think I like to think it bodes well for him developing as a quarterback beyond just being the athletic specimen we can all agree that he is, and getting to be, a pro NFL quarterback. Obviously 2 different things we have to bridge a gap to right now. I would be concerned early for what to expect with Richardson. This would kind of, the thing is, I do think he gets thrown in pretty early, which it's going to be sink or swim. And I think we find out early if he's swimming or sinking, which it's going to be, which is nice. I think, you make that pick, at least if this were the landing spot, you make that pick, you get to find out pretty quick if he's going to be your quarterback 1 for the future, or the Carolina Panthers quarterback 1 for a little bit, or however long it might be. But significant investment, heck of a swing for the fences for sure, to say the very least. So moving on to number 5 here, our running back 2 off the board with this current DLF ADP and Superflex. We got Jahmyr Gibbs coming off the board at number 5, and the Detroit Lions backfield gets all the more crowded in the 2nd round. Pick 48 overall. Interesting pick. This is our first 2nd round pick in the NFL draft. Looking at the, comparing this side by side with our DLF ADP. What are your thoughts on this? I mean, I like Jahmyr Gibbs. I hate the situation he's landing in. As much as I like it long term, but it's just going to be very gross. And I think this is one where we can easily say the ADP for him, I think, dips a little because of that first hit you're going to be able to expect from him. But I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I think the dip will definitely come if he ends up here. I do believe Ian said in his mock, if he didn't, I apologize, but I would assume at this point DeAndre Swift has left the building.
Sure.
So Jahmyr Gibbs coming in, he's going to be the 1B to David Montgomery, as the big veteran there for a little bit. I mean, I think by the end of the season, if not by the end of the season, the beginning of next season, Jahmyr Gibbs will be taking on the majority of that role out of the backfield. Like you said, I like it long term, not maybe the most ideal short term, but the production that we're expecting from rookies these days is sometimes unrealistic anyway. So, looking at production from rookies with a, maybe a safer lens is looking from year 2 onward. And I think that looks good for Jahmyr Gibbs here.
He does not say that Swift will be gone, but Swift is an impending free agent. Awkward year 1, to say the least. I think it's going to be one of those that hurts his immediate ADP stock, but hey, that's good for you. I think he becomes more of a value at that point. I think he falls a little bit down boards. Possibly, it depends on how people feel about some of these other spots we're going to talk about at the end of the day. Speaking about spots that we don't necessarily love, the prophecy that has been foretold has not come to fruition.
Sad.
Jackson Smith and Jigba drafted right before joining up with the Houston Texans and CJ Stroud. Goes to the Tennessee Titans again.
Oh,
Landing spot we discussed last
again.
week. Yeah, a landing spot we discussed last week. I think this is another one of those where it hurts his stock day one, but I don't know if any of these other spots really jive me in a way that pushes him. It would never push him down the board for me.
Of course
But I'm
not.
saying as a general consensus, I think there are going to be people that possibly pass on JSN because he went to the Titans. And if you're looking short term, might make sense. But I think in the long term, the talent will win out. The process for that team or philosophy could change. We discussed this a bit last week. Do you want to add anything else to what we talked about last week? Do you think he goes up or down at ADP? What are you thinking?
Yeah, I think it would naturally push him down a little bit. Like I talked about last week, I think him and Burks would cannibalize each other a little bit in the run heavy offense. But as soon as that offense switches, there'd be plenty of volume, I think, for the both of them. The question is, how long do you have to wait for that?
Which is, when you make these rookie picks, you want to see some ROI early or at least some encouraging signs to say the very least. Moving on to the next pick, we have Jordan Addison at pick 7, who went to the Minnesota Vikings. Great landing spot at the first round pick at pick 23. Love this. I think Jordan Addison fits in best as a wide receiver 2 in an offense.
Mm-hmm.
I think he and TJ Hawkinson can kind of be coexisting second targets in this offense and lay groundwork for post Kirk Cousins. But I'd love you're bigger on Jordan Addison than I am. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this too.
Yeah, I am bigger on Jordan Addison. I'm also bigger than Jordan Addison. Hey, okay.
Nice.
Doesn't matter though. He's a really good NFL wide receiver. I would love him to be at the Minnesota Vikings across from Justin Jefferson. Talk about not only just not having the defense, keying in on you at all, but also what a great guy to learn from and grow under.
Sure.
Especially because I think they have somewhat similar games where they're more technical than that physical
Sure.
alpha. I'm going to outmatch you with my frame kind of. These guys are technicians, Jordan Addison and Justin Jefferson. So I love this. I think, the passing offense there can definitely give us great fantasy production pretty quickly with Jordan Addison. I think he's a pro-ready guy. This is one of my favorite landing spots for him.
Any of these, I think I touched on it last week or at some point, these little brother wide receivers, Jordan Addison, Josh Downs, Zay Flowers, I think is kind of in that mix too. But either of these guys that go to be a wide receiver 2 next to a really good player, I love any of these landing spots, especially with respectable draft capital. You can't hate it. And I think it really puts a good expectation on what that player is at the next level. Because it's not like with, kind of with Devonta Smith. I think most people have the expectation he's a wide receiver 2 best suited at the NFL level. And even when he got thrust into that role with AJ Brown coming in, he actually excelled beyond wide receiver 2 because he had that other piece alongside him, and that offense took huge steps forward. I think you can expect something similar for Jordan Addison. I think he locks in as a solid wide receiver 2, and it would make me drafting him. I don't know if I'd still love drafting him here.
Oh, I would.
Again, it depends on what's on the board.
That's true. There are some running backs I do like around this point.
Yeah, I think we start. As we get through this list, I think a lot of running backs start creeping up the board aggressively. And I'd say less creeping, more running. Pun intended. With that said, we have another quarterback coming off the board. We have Will Levis at the 8th spot, current DLF, Superflex ADP. Going to the Indianapolis Colts at the 1-4, first round pick, 4th pick overall. I mean, for a guy that needs to develop and put things together between the years, I think this is a great landing spot right off the rip. What do you got for this one?
So Will Levis going to the Colts, a good offense to grow in. We talk about quarterback development. This is a good offense to grow in. Jonathan Taylor can run the ball. You have good wide receivers to throw the ball to, Michael Pittman Jr. and Alec Pierce. The Colts have a good defense. It's a good team. And Will Levis, while he's probably not going to go in there day one and take him to the playoffs, I think this is an opportunity for him to grow over a 2-year period. And by that 3rd year, have that opportunity to maybe take them, into that playoff run, because the AFC is not an easy conference to get into the playoffs and make a run in. I think this is kind of a long-term play for the Colts, and they're okay with that because they've been trying so long to get that veteran and turn it around real quick. They're finally going to commit to maybe not a full rebuild, but certainly a couple years of development.
I would love this spot. Like I said, this spot is, for a quarterback that needs some development, specifically upstairs. I don't think there's a better spot for him, to be quite honest. And I think what he does to that offense, I think with this draft too, I think his ADP rises a little bit. I think a lot more people feel better about this position because I think he's starting soon. I don't think this isn't a guy who's sitting for maybe at all.
He's starting by week 6.
And I think possibly week 1.
Possibly week 1 as well.
Yeah. I love the idea of the tandem of Will Levis and Gardner Minshew broing out together. I don't know what it is, but I think they would be just the best of pals. I'm all about that here.
I could see that.
Moving on, we got the number 9 pick coming off the Superflex ADP board, and that is Quentin Johnston going off the board in the first round to the New York Giants, who need something different at the wide receiver position. I mean, it's all under 5'11" slot guys right now, it seems.
All under 180.
Yeah, I mean, this provides something different. I like the vibe of it. I think this is a good spot for him. I don't love it because I don't know that he's a true alpha. I think a lot of people are starting to come around to the idea of him being a better 2 in an offense, which is weird given his size. And maybe that's just something he has to do early in his career. Not to draw lines, but DK Metcalf was a 2 early on in his career to a Tyler Lockett.
Yeah, despite being that bigger guy.
And now that's kind of flipped as Tyler Lockett has aged. I think he doesn't have that in front of him right now, so that might be something that just happens later naturally through the draft, whatever the case is. But like the spot overall, love to hear your thoughts as well.
Yeah, I think this is a great spot, for his potential upside, because if Quentin Johnston hits and this is the situation, then he is Daniel Jones's number 1 wide receiver. Whether or not you think Daniel Jones is a top quarterback doesn't matter. If he's thrown to this guy and he has that, if they're both doing well, it's going to be great for fantasy. But the thing is, like you said, I don't know if I trust Quentin Johnston to walk in and be the wide receiver 1 from day 1. And that might be the expectation with this draft capital and investment. And that's when I start to worry about the development of players. And, I'm not going to say a guy can never develop. I always want to root for the players. I want players to develop. But there are guys that are certainly more risky than others.
And I do think this is one of them. And I think, again, when we talk about players versus expectation versus the production we have in mind for them, this is one that screams kind of, where do I feel good about drafting him? Because at 9, it is not it yet. There are a lot of players coming up down the board. There are players in the middle of the second round I feel better about than Quentin Johnston. Drafting here, not necessarily just by value, but drafting just here in general, and we'll get to those after we get to this guy. Moving on to pick 10, we got Zay Flowers coming off the board in the first round as well to the New England Patriots.
Yeah.
Is he dead right away? Do we have positive vibes on Zay Flowers to the Patriots? I don't hate it because I think Zay can be a 1. I think he's electric enough. I think he has that, that it factor. I think he has that. The size is a little iffy, obviously. The sizes out there are going to be concerned, but what are your thoughts on this pick?
I have Zay kind of in the same tier as a lot of these guys where they're better wide receiver 2s than wide receiver 1s.
I tend to agree.
And with Zay, I think he's got incredible talent, but, the Patriots offense has not been a kind one for fantasy production, has not been a kind one for wide receiver development.
Nope.
You look at the history and you look at, what this looks like with him, being maybe not the one with Juju there. Maybe, Juju, the veteran, is the one for, a little bit. I don't think that Zay Flowers is going to be able to take over that wide receiver 1 role here with the lack of electric around him. He would be the only player that has that playmaking ability. The defense, I think, could neutralize him easier in this kind of offense than they would in another offense where he'd be able to shine.
I think this is one that would send him down boards more likely than not, which, hey man, not every landing spot is going to be as perfect as the next one we're going to talk about.
No.
Moving on to the next pick here, we got Zach Charbonnet, pick 11 in Superflex ADP. Not for long if this is the landing spot that happens. going to the Cowboys in the 3rd round, albeit the late 3rd round, the 3rd round pick 90 overall. But I mean, it's the Cowboys. He gets to be in the tandem, the Zeke side of the tandem that was with Tony Pollard.
Yep.
I mean, a guy who's obviously much more fresh than Zeke. I think we can all agree at this point that Zeke is not the player he used to be. I think Charbonnet fills in as a great replacement. Not the same player, obviously, but compared to how Zeke is now, I think he fills in very admirably. Love to hear your thoughts if you have any different opinions on that.
No, I think this is nice. I think we have a pretty good idea what his projected fantasy production would be right away. He's going to obviously have the timeshare with Pollard, but they're going to use Pollard the same way that they did last year. And this guy Zach Charbonnet would be taking over that Zeke role. The touchdowns would be there. I think you would have a good RB 3-4 for your team rookie year, and then possibly better production from there, depending on the Tony Pollard situation. Yeah, with him being on the franchise tag, he could be gone after 1 year if they put the draft capital into Zach Charbonnet. Not that 3rd round draft capital is a ton of investment, right? But if Charbonnet shows out his rookie year, makes it a little bit easier not to pay Pollard.
I think this would be a landing spot that would immediately probably put him around pick 7 or 8. Addison possibly falls. I think Levis goes up. I think Johnson falls. I think Charbonnet slides right in there to that discussion, just because, over a wide receiver, a running back is just naturally going to tend to come off the board sooner, especially when, Addison, as much as I love the landing spot going to the Vikings, it's clear what his role is going to be, and what limiting expectations there are that probably should be there already. But at the end of the day, after it happens, that's how it goes. But talking about how it goes downs, we got Josh Downs at number 12, Superflex ADP rounding up the 1st round, going to the Baltimore Ravens in the 1st round. Your Ravens pick up the best pure slot receiver in the draft.
There it is.
At pick 22. What do you think about this one? I want to hear your thoughts. I love Josh Downs. I'm going to be rooting for him wherever he goes, but I want to hear your thoughts on this pick as well.
Until I see the new Ravens offense with Moncton as the offensive coordinator, it's going to be hard to give a great answer on what I would project for Josh Downs' usage. First initial reaction is I'm not a fan of it for his fantasy production.
Yeah.
OBJ is there just for this year, but Bateman's still there. Downs, he would be the starting slot receiver, of course, but I still expect this to be a somewhat run-heavy offense. I think Lamar Jackson's an incredible quarterback, but is the volume going to be there for Josh Downs? And that's what we know we kind of expect for him. If he's going to do well in fantasy, it's going to be a high-volume role out of the slot. That's not the kind of role he would have here. I think he would do great for the Ravens in the NFL, but fantasy-wise, the volume just probably wouldn't be there unless this offense looks, not just completely different, but the whole idea around the offense is completely different.
I think this is one, if it were to happen, even though it's 1st round draft capital, I think because it's not a sexy landing spot by any stretch of the imagination.
No. And he'd be in the 2nd round quite easily.
Easily, yeah. I mean, he's already a fringe first. I mean, I was talking about picking him up at the 209 in a draft we did for a rookie draft console. I think there's a good chance he's on the board. Given what's going to happen in this made-up fictitious draft, I think there's a good chance he's kicking around on the board at that point. But so now we get into the 2nd round, and this is a guy who actually climbed up quite a bit over the last rookie ADP cycle, and that's Hendon Hooker. This is a guy who was going in the back of the 2nd round. He's now at the 201. He's been having a lot of 1st round draft hype, so it kind of makes sense. However, in this instant, he gets drafted to the Detroit Lions in the 2nd round with the 55th pick overall, shortly after Jahmyr Gibbs. I don't know how I feel about it. I think there's a path, but I'm not big on Hooker anyway, so I wouldn't be super in on this pick. What are your thoughts?
Hendon Hooker can run an offense. And I think with Jamison Williams, Amon-Ra St. Brown out there, Jahmyr Gibbs now being added to it, and Dan Campbell putting together a pretty good defense, that's all he'd be asked to do. That's all Jared Goff is asked to do, get the ball out to the playmakers. Hendon Hooker can do that same thing. It's 2nd round draft capital, and usually I stay away from 2nd round quarterbacks. I'm probably not going to be picking him up here at the 201, but if he's falling down the board to the back half of the 2nd, I'd be taking a shot on him with that offense that is there in front of him. If he does get into the starting position, he has a path to having some, very fantasy relevant seasons.
I'd definitely be out at this value for sure, because I'm not sold that this offense and this team is really in the market to be moving on from Goff. So, I mean, if this happens, you obviously kind of have to reconsider that notion. But I don't necessarily believe in Hendon Hooker as a pro style quarterback. I think there was a lot of, college style offense that he was
Yes.
playing with. And I think the stats that he's put together, are inflated because of that and all these things. And when you look at the film, one of the things he's touted for is, being mindful with the ball and taking care of it. And statistically, absolutely looks like that. Even turnover worthy plays, when you look at PFF, still very well regarded in that. I believe he had the least in the class this past season. But it doesn't, when you watch the film, it does not feel like he takes care of that football. And at the NFL level, it's very different with how things pan out, and the margin for error is that much smaller. And I don't know that Hooker can overcome that. Being an older prospect as well, it's kind of that old dog, new tricks kind of thing. I'd be very hesitant here.
Yeah, and of all the quarterbacks, well, of all the top 5 quarterbacks, Hendon Hooker is unfortunately the one that is most stuck on the one read quarterback. You watch the film and you see that one read a lot. And, his response to that was, well, I can't help it that my first read's open all the time. And hey, it usually was.
Touche.
But still, there was a lot of times if that first read wasn't open, he was tucking and running. And, that second round draft capital for the quarterback, it does put me off. So 201, not happening for me. Back half of the second, at the very end of the second, if I need a quarterback, I'll take a swing on him with the hope that he can start in 2024.
Moving on here, talking the 14th pick off the board in Superflex ADP currently in April, we got Devon Achane coming off the board. He went to the Cleveland Browns in the 3rd round with pick 98. So shortly after Zach Charbonnet, Devon Achane follows. When the Cleveland Browns to back up Nick Chubb, that backup role is kind of open, and who knows where Nick Chubb's career is going. How do you feel about this one? Because I feel like there's going to be some thoughts with this one that are different.
There's going to be some people taking Devon Achane a lot earlier than I'm going to be taking Devon Achane. So I'd probably have no Devon Achane at this point. Anyway. But with the Browns, it'd be like, oh, he's just going to replace Kareem Hunt. He's going to have that Kareem Hunt role. He's going to be that pass catcher. I don't think Devon Achane is the pass catcher that Kareem Hunt was. I don't think he's the pass catcher that some other guys in this draft class are. So I don't think that this is a situation that works out great.
I think people are going to want to draw that line. And like you said, that was something that I never felt strongly about with Achane. I know this past season he was not as utilized as much of a pass catcher as he was the previous year. But even then, I never looked at this guy and I saw, wow, great receiver. I actually graded him very highly as a runner for his size. But, everybody wants to tout him as a pass catcher, and I didn't feel that way when I watched the film. So, and the size concerns are a thing at the running back position more than any position for me. Size is definitely going to play a role. So I don't love this pick. Still a bit rich for me, especially with some of these landing spots that aren't even in the top 24 that we'll talk about as well. That are some nice landing spots. Moving on, another guy that we're iffy on. This is an interesting one. So we got JALIN HYATT coming off pick 15 in DLF Superflex ADP, going to the Chargers again, same as last week, but a whole round later in the 2nd round at pick 54.
I like that better.
I like that better as a player, and I think it does a lot for his draft value come rookie draft. I think it makes him a lot more appropriately priced. I'm still not super interested at this point, but I'm not going to be shaking my head at people drafting him like I would at the 109, like they would if he was a 1st round pick. I think that cools people's heads a little bit on him. I like the spot overall, but I do think at the end of the day, he's the 3rd option in that offense. Possibly 4th, depending on what Chargers end up drafting down the board. Who knows? Maybe they fill out a running back spot, or maybe a tight end spot that we'll talk about. Do you have any additional thoughts on JALIN HYATT before we move along?
Nope. He's going to take on that Jalen Guyton role if he went to the Chargers. He goes with the Herbert. If you get with Herbert's arm, he's going to, fly up draft boards still either way if it's 1st or 2nd round draft capital. And, because of that, I'm going to be taking a shot on him somewhere amongst my leagues. At the 203, I'm passing.
I'm with you. I'm with you there. Because there's significant value coming down the board, in my opinion. One of which is this next pick. That was the value in the actual NFL draft as well. We got Michael Mayer coming up at pick 16, going to my Green Bay Packers.
How about it?
In the 2nd round
Yeah.
pick 42. So this is, I mean, hey, this is what you want. This is interesting. I think this is one where Michael Mayer, I think, does make the most sense for a Packers team and what we need out of that position. I'd love to hear your thoughts, though, on how it affects his fantasy value and if he climbs up boards after this pick, like I think he will.
Yeah, I think he'll climb up boards. Back to the back half of the first, early second. We've seen the Packers tight ends do well before. Now, Aaron Rodgers is most likely not going to be there anymore, but we all have a little bit of faith in Jordan Love to be able to put together somewhat of a productive offense, at least. And I think Michael Mayer would quickly come in there and be one of the top targets in an offense that really needs someone who can be a target hog.
I think this would be a great fit all around. And given all the things he can contribute to, like running game, that's a Packers staple now is the run game. And they're going to lean on that all the more with Jordan Love coming in. They're going to lean more and more on play action and things like that. This is where Michael Mayer is going to make his money. And I think, if he's on the board at pick 15 in the first round, I'd be kind of surprised if they pass on him then, to be honest, for what I think he can do with this offense. But Nate, we're moving on to the next pick here, pick 17. We're talking about one of your favorite running backs in the class. We're talking about Tank Bigsby.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to be feeling validated as can be with this landing spot. He goes to the Cincinnati Bengals, who having some Joe Mixon issues. And in the second round, pick 60. What validating draft capital. This is incredible. This is exactly what you want to see for Tank. I mean, this is probably one of the top 3 scenarios, I think, for Tank Bigsby at the end of the day. Go ahead and talk on it, Nate. This is your guy.
This happens. I'm picking up Tank Bigsby, 107, 108.
Yeah, I was going to say.
No questions asked. No questions asked. I think Tank Bigsby can give me I think Tank Bigsby can give me Joe Mixon fantasy production over his career. And I'm picking up that at the middle/start of the back of the first. Come on. It shows the talent of this running back class. And that's, Bob, you're talking about these running backs going to be coming up the board real quickly. As soon as these guys get their day 2 draft capital, they're shooting up the board. Tank Bigsby's not going to be lasting, to the 17th overall pick. He's going to be a first round if he gets anything close to this kind of draft capital landing spot.
Yeah,
he deserves it.
Absolutely. He leaps Mayer, Hyatt, A-Chain, Hooker, Downs, probably Charbonnet. I think there's a discussion to be had there, and that's kind of a flavor pick, I think. But I think he leaps Flowers, Johnston, probably another conversation with Levis, and probably that grouping passes up Addison. So, yeah, I think 107, 108, I think is a prime location to be talking about him. If this draft capital were to come to fruition and landing spot.
Which is exactly what I've been saying the whole time, Bob.
I know.
I'm ready.
I'm
ready.
I'm not the one beating the drum the other way. So that ain't me. Another interesting running back that I think would hit people different. Tyjae Spears is the 18th player off the board in DLF Superflex ADP. He goes to the New England Patriots. In the third round.
I don't hate it. I don't even hate it, Bob.
Pick 76.
I think he's actually a somewhat decent compliment to Ramondre Stevenson. Now, fantasy football is obviously going to be very limited.
Sure.
And, he's not like an incredible receiving back that's going to take on a ton of that role either. Limited. Still, I think it would be an exciting spot for him NFL-wise, but fantasy-wise, it's going to be limited. Now, do they move on from Ramondre Stevenson at some point?
Possible.
Is he on a contract extension, Bob? I don't think he's been extended.
He's still on his rookie deal. Yep.
So he could be moving out of there in a year or two.
For someone who is not, and I'm not in on Tyjae Spears. Yeah. I want that to be clear. I'm just not in on Tyjae Spears like everybody else is, where he's, a top of the second round pick. This would really shoot that in the foot for me. And I think a lot of people, another pick like Jalin Hyatt, I think it kind of puts him to where he probably should be in drafts at the end of the day. Speaking of where he should be in drafts, Zach Evans, pick 19, current DLF ADP. Nate, if I told you that Zach Evans was a 5th round pick in the NFL draft, you'd probably tell me, well, there goes his value. Nobody's drafting that guy anymore.
Won't see him anymore, right?
But if I told you that he went to the 49ers,
what?
It'd be like, well,
He's
I thought
back.
the beast was dead. Sure, yeah.
Coming up.
Absolutely. Yeah, we'd have to call him that if that was the case. For what it's worth, I think this, as much as I hate the draft capital, if there's anything we know about 49ers backfields for the most part, it's that draft capital doesn't matter, but they do still have a significant investment in CMC back there. So you'd have to temper our expectations early. I think you have to assume he's a handcuff. So I think he's still falling down boards. Do you have any additional thoughts on this pick?
Yeah, he'd stick around though. He'd stick around for sure.
Yeah, for
because
sure.
you know anything with 49ers, draft capital doesn't matter. They all get injured. They all get opportunities at some point. Now, long term, I don't think it's a great spot for Zach Evans because I think there's just too much talent and they're going to replace him because they draft someone every single year. But he's definitely going to have like 3 weeks where he gets to play and everyone's really excited. So good for him.
I think this knocks him out of the first 2 rounds, or it should. I think when you see that 5, and especially with what we see coming off the board in this mock, some very nice day 2 picks that we'll discuss in a minute here. But Zach Evans would be, I think 49ers is a great fit for him.
I do personally. As well. Yep.
I think this is, about as optimistic as I can get, especially if he was going day 3. I think this is best case scenario. If he's going day 2, obviously options are a little more open. But moving on to pick 20, we got Dalton Kincaid, the one I've been saying for a long, long time, to, instead of drafting Brock Bowers next year in the first round, just draft Dalton Kincaid in the second. And now we don't even know if we're going to be able to do that, which is kind of takes all the wind out of the sails of that dramatic quote.
Yeah.
Interesting landing spot. He goes to the Buffalo Bills in the first round, pick 27. Very interesting. I want to hear your thoughts. Dawson Knox is gone at this point. What are your thoughts on this landing spot with Dalton Kincaid?
I still don't really know what to think about it because you love it, but you also hate it because Dawson Knox was very inconsistent. And I think I like Dalton Kincaid a bit more as a consistent option than Dawson Knox. I think Dalton Kincaid's a bit more talented. I just question if he'll get the volume. He might. The Bills pass quite a bit. And, Stephon Diggs is going to be the wide receiver 1, but Dalton Kincaid would be the tight end 1 and the number 2 target there. I know that's what we're trying to get to there. But just to be honest, the Dawson Knox inconsistency has tainted the tight end position for the Buffalo Bills for me just a little bit. Obviously, 20th overall pick, he's an absolute steal. He's a first, beginning of the second round player. With the Bills being connected to Josh Allen, heck, he might even be coming into the first round in tight end premium leagues.
I agree. And I think the thing, too, to keep in mind is, he gets to be that quote unquote 2, that, little brother, I guess you could say, although he's much bigger than Stephon Diggs. But the thing is, like, Stephon Diggs is not getting any younger. So we could start transitioning this offense to Dalton Kincaid being the primary weapon. We've seen, look at the AFC.
3 years.
Look at the AFC, though. Yeah, okay, you're assuming that Stephon Diggs is going to be at peak capacity for the next 3 years. I think that's a little wild to me, but that's a discussion for another day.
Woo!
That's any old wide receiver, not just Stephon Diggs.
He's only 29 this year. You're telling me he can't put up like a top 36 production in his 31-year-old?
Nate, we'll talk about it later. But I'm just saying that I think this offense can transition. You look at how other AFC teams have been successful. Mark Andrews in Baltimore. Most notably, Travis Kelce in Kansas City. Some bugaboos for the Bills, especially Kansas City, more so than Baltimore. No offense, Nate. I apologize. But, I could see a world where, especially with this draft capital, that's something that they kind of work towards, or where they don't have to have this super alpha wide receiver anymore, to where the alpha receiver just ends up being the tight end. So I like the spot. I don't know if I love it as much as like a Packers landing spot or a Jacksonville landing spot. Can't hate it. You're linked to an elite quarterback for the first 4 years of your career, guaranteed with a possible 5th year. You can't really be all that mad at that. So moving on to this next pick, we got Kendre Miller coming off the board at the 21st pick in Superflex ADP. He gets day 3 draft capital. He goes to the Arizona Cardinals, though.
Not bad.
Decent enough landing spot. I think this is a fun landing spot. Pick 105, 4th round. When you're looking at these day 3 backs, we've talked about it this year, you kind of have to, with how just packed this class is, I think you have to take into some consideration that maybe they're not going there because they're bad. They're going there because there's just so freaking many running backs to go around this year. I think this is a case for Kendre Miller. I'm big on Kendre Miller. I think this is like my ideal landing spot for him. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you think about it as well.
Yeah, I think it's a nice landing spot where he's going to get the opportunity to show off if he wants to have that role or not. And if he takes it, I think he would be able to get it, because this is a very early 4th round pick. This is like one of the first 4th round picks. I know I still have that threshold where, hey, day 3 is day 3 at the end of the day, but hey, I'll take 4th round draft capital certainly over any other draft capital on day 3. And I think with the guy in front of Kendre Miller being James Conner, and that's it, I think Kendre Miller would have the opportunity this year to make some noise.
In a battle of electricity, Kendre Miller wins out very quickly.
Yes.
And in an offense that will probably need a punch this year in a new system and a new regime, I think they could look to make that change early. There's no, ties with coaches or anything like that anymore. You have to always consider that too. We have to make that same discussion next year, with Kendre Miller, maybe, being a 4th round pick being passed up, but who knows? That's a discussion for another day as well. Moving on to the 22nd pick, we got Sean Tucker going to the Kansas City Chiefs, but in the 4th round. This one is one that I think, anybody going to Kansas City, Isaiah Pacheco, truthers and holders be damned again, like the Rachaad White truthers and holders. Sean Tucker's going to go much earlier, I think, than pick 22 at this point. Yeah. But I think this is a good landing spot. That backfield, as much as we like Isaiah Pacheco and think he's, a solid running back and obviously, has kind of carried his weight to this point, a little better draft capital, a little different player. What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I love this spot for Sean Tucker. Now, Sean Tucker's not going to be taking on the Jerick McKinnon role. He's not that, elite of a receiving back. Agreed. He's kind of, I think he's kind of taking on the Isaiah Pacheco role here.
Agreed.
And that's going to be I think Pacheco's not just going to go away. So I love the landing spot because there's an opportunity there, and the ceiling, if it works out, is quite high, but it's also murky. The Chiefs backfield starting to feel kind of similar to like how we've looked at the 49ers backfield for the past couple of years. It's just a chaotic mess, and you just ride whoever's the hot hand. Now for fantasy football players, that sucks. I
think you're right on with, him and Isaiah Pacheco are kind of almost cannibalized. It's kind of redundant. Yep. But you have to look at earlier draft capital. Isaiah Pacheco, you were great down the stretch last year, but I don't know if you're holding off Sean Tucker, who I think is a value at this point.
Yeah.
I'm not super, I'm not the Sean Tucker guy on the channel. That's not me. But I do think at this point, because of how his draft process has gone, yeah, he's going to slide down boards. It's just kind of fact of the matter is. So I think there's a value. I think they're getting a day 2 player, early day 3, early-ish day 3. I think the same thing with Kendre Miller, to be totally honest. Moving on to pick 23, we got CEDRIC TILLMAN, getting close to rounding out the back half of this 2nd round. Going to the Arizona Cardinals, they ain't done.
D-Hop
they go ahead and get their D-Hop replacement in the 2nd round, pick 34, so the 3rd pick, day 2. I think solid. I think this is appropriate for CEDRIC TILLMAN overall. Mm-hmm. I think it's a good fill-in. They get their, primary X receiver, their lead receiver. Marquise Brown gets
anybody else like that right now?
Yep, exactly. So he fills in pretty much day 1. It's a nice pick. I think it's a good spot. I'm curious, how do you think this impacts his ADP? Do you think he rises with just kind of what's on the board ahead of him, what's maybe falling down? Yeah. Where do you think he goes here?
Yeah, I think he rises when you're the 3rd pick in the 2nd round. You're going to start getting comparisons to guys like T. Higgins and some of the other good wide receivers we've seen picked at the beginning of the 2nd round recently. I've seen a couple of threads on Twitter talking about top 40 draft capital is all that really matters for wide receivers. Don't worry about if it's 1st round or not. If they're selected in that top 40, top 50, that's where they, that hit rate is. CEDRIC TILLMAN being the 34th player off the board, he's got a good chance. He's going to be given opportunity in that offense. He could easily be the 2nd target behind Marquise Brown, I think.
1000% agree. Moving on to the last pick of the 2nd round. We're talking Marvin Mims coming off at pick 24. He goes to the New Orleans Saints, joins my boy Chris Olave in the 3rd round, pick 71. How are you feeling about this one? You are much more in on Mims than I am. Are you still in on Mims with this pick at the end of the day?
Yeah, I think I still am. This value as well. I think, this doesn't really raise his value too much. I have him kind of pegged as more of a mid to late 2nd. I think I'd still have that value on him with this draft capital, with this landing spot. I like Marvin Mims and his talent. To be honest, I don't know if him and Chris Olave complement each other super well. Now Michael Thomas is still there, and we don't know what he's going to look like. If he comes on and takes a top role in MIMS as a wide receiver 3, working out of the slot and interchanging with Olave a little bit, then sure, I think this could be in a good spot for him. But if Michael Thomas doesn't come back, I'm not sure Marvin Mims is ready to be the wide receiver 2 across from Chris Olave. Not sure that they mesh well. But yeah, I like the spot, to be honest, because outside of Michael Thomas, there isn't a ton of competition. Chris Olave, of course, outside of those two guys, not a ton of competition for Marvin Mims to get targets and opportunities right away.
I think this is a fine fit. I think this is one where, and I think his ADP, I think it's a non-mover, a non-factor. I don't think it really changes too much for him. It's not a super plus landing spot. It's not a negative landing spot. I think, anywhere where I still value him, I still, have him as kind of that, later half of the middle second, that 208 to this spot here is kind of where I'm looking to kick the tires on Mims when it comes draft day.
Mm-hmm.
But now let's talk about one player from day 2. We got some notable day 2 picks here that I have listed on my screen here, Nate. Go ahead and pick one. We're allowed to pick the same player because I think we're going to. Who is your ADP breaker of day 2 when it comes to notable day 2 picks?
I think this probably is a pretty obvious one here. And I'm going to go with Izzy A. I'm assuming that's one you're saying I'm going to pick. Yep. Izzy A going to the Chargers. Eckler's probably moving on. And if not, he's moving on very quickly. Izzy A going to be that guy for the Chargers, we would assume. And with the athleticism that he put out his pro day, and I think his film is good, not great. So I think the 3rd round draft capital is pretty fitting. But I think with an opportunity and the role and with being the running back and seeing how Eckler was used and Izzy Abanikanda being a good receiver himself, this would be a really good fit. I think he would step into the Eckler role and just, produce not quite Eckler numbers, but very impressive numbers for a rookie.
This landing spot happens. I think he's a 1st round rookie pick. I think he's going that high because the LA Chargers landing spot, especially if Eckler's moving on, maybe if Eckler's still like begrudgingly kicking around for a little bit, maybe he's early 2nd, but he ain't falling past that. This is a guy we've seen in a lot of our mocks going mid 2nd to late 2nd already. I think he's like 301 in Superflex ADP to start with. So he's already just missed the list. But I think this is a pick that absolutely breaks ADP at the end of the day. It rises very quickly. Izzy A was somebody who I wasn't a huge fan of when it came to his film either. It was a guy that, took what was given. I like to comp him to what Zach Evans was if he actually took what was given to him versus just doing his thing that he did. But the athleticism, the size that Izzy A brings to, there's a lot of size concerns with players in this class and even some production concerns with players in this class. Then you get a landing spot that's great. You have size concerns that are thrown out the window, athleticism concerns thrown out the window. Izzy A in this spot is a massive win, in my opinion, especially day 2. There's no chance he's getting into past the early 2nd at the absolute latest. And that's just because there's a lot of good talent on the board, more than anything. But is there anyone from day 3?
Quite honestly, no. I don't think there's anyone that really stands out. There's some interesting spots, Roschon Johnson to the Bears, but that's another one that feels a bit redundant.
Sure.
Tank Dell to the Commanders, that's a fun one, but that's a pretty crowded wide receiver spot. Kenny McIntosh to the Broncos actually kind of interests me a little bit because I think he could complement Javonte Williams in a decent manner, but with 5th round draft capital, that's more of a redraft play almost off the waiver wires, or just kind of one of the spot starters than maybe a long-term dynasty play.
I think an interesting one, and I think this is kind of what he needs here. Kayshon Boutte going to the Falcons in the 5th round. What a fall from grace for starters, but I think the fact that there's just nothing there really in front of him, it helps. It all helps.
Maybe you gamble on him in the back of the 3rd round.
Exactly. I think he's a 3rd, 4th round pick in your rookie draft. Given what we actually have in front of him, he's probably locked into a 4th round pick. Because there's a lot of nice day 2 picks. I'll run through them real quick. Jonathan Mingo went to the Steelers. Tucker Kraft went to the Dolphins. Rashee Rice to the Broncos. Jaden Reed to the Texans. the Packers do Packer things and go and draft another tight end. They go and draft Darnell Washington and Michael Mayer in day 2.
Incredible.
Why am I a fan of this team? Tyler Scott goes to the Colts. Sam Laporta goes to the Lions. I love that fit. That's another. That was another consideration for me for a ADP breaker, because that's a perfect fit. Parker Washington to the Seahawks. Izzy A to the Chargers, as we discussed. Luke Musgrave to the Jaguars.
Very nice.
That's a very nice fit as well. And then our boy, hey, Nate, somebody put Xavier Hutchinson day 2. This is why we love Ian.
Oh my gosh, we love Ian.
Because he put Xavier Hutchinson to day 2, round 3 for the Panthers. Wide open play, pretty much. He gets to be not a fixture of that offense right away, but he gets opportunity in that offense right away to set himself aside and prove himself at the NFL level. We got Trey Palmer going to the Eagles. Michael Wilson goes to the Chiefs in the 3rd round. That's going to be one that, puts him on the map pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. And then A.T. Perry goes to the Texans as well. So the Texans draft Jaden Reed and A.T. Perry to go along with C.J. Stroud and the weapons that they already have in John Mechie, Dalton Schultz, which I think is kind of a sneaky good weapon to have. Yep. But there's some really good picks in this class. There's some really good picks in this draft, this NFL mock draft by our buddy Ian Cummings, friend of the channel, friend of the show, all of the things. Love Ian. This is a fun one to run through, and I think it would have some serious ramifications when it comes to ADP. Yeah. And at the end of the day, we see a lot of NFL mocks that destroy draft boards. This is one that I think would be a very fun draft if it were to happen out this way. It's obviously a perfect mock. Obviously 2 weeks before the draft, he has it nailed in at this point.